Hi, it's Catherine McQuaid. I wanted to share with you some of the tips and tricks that I've discovered as a person who helps our clients capture major accounts in the business to business space. And there are two general themes. One is that you enter at the top of the house at several points simultaneously. And this is either places inside of a brand who might also have a need for your services, or the intention is to collapse and shorten the sales cycle. And it's great to have my personal experiences validated by some very important research that has been published most recently in a couple of years ago. Corporate Executive Board, or CEB, published their findings on buyer behavior changes under the title Challenger Customer. And so what is important for us to realize is that not only has buyer behavior been influenced by the internet and the ability for executives to get information about us without us as salespeople having to show up and present to them, but most significantly, in around the theme of multiple points of entry into an account, is that there are an average of 5.4 stakeholders, in other words, people who are going to make the decision to purchase whatever we're offering. So let's look at how we might shorten a sales cycle using multiple contacts. First of all, it will diversify risk if we simultaneously contact a number of business units in or operating groups inside of a brand. This is as important to do in a small family-held business as it is in a multinational, because what it will mean is that you will facilitate consensus building among all the stakeholders. If there's 5.4 stakeholders, no matter the size of the business, our task is not necessarily to present how great our offering is, but to help those individuals in that company come to an agreement that addressing the business problem that we're pointing to is important for the company to do. So when we're doing our outreach into the stakeholders, we're not on the quest necessarily for somebody with the title that sounds like they're going to be the buyer, or whether or not they may have the budget, because a lot of these influencers and stakeholders are in fact exercising indirect influence. They don't necessarily sign the check, but they are people who have the power to say no. And some of these indirect influencers are found in user groups. They may be the people who would be using or be impacted by the installation of your solution. They may be subject matter experts who would be consulted to evaluate how your product or service works, and they definitely have the power to say, no, this is not the right thing or the best thing out there for us. They could be departments who would be tracking or gathering the data that you are either delivering, or which is the promise that you made that was going to drive change or increased revenues, or whatever your sales proposition is. Major clients can also have an important say in a go no go situation, because it may be that your platform or your processes are going to impact some of their business, their transaction with the company that you're hoping to win as a client. And infrastructure suppliers, particularly in a world where data is oil, as someone said, the infrastructure suppliers and vendors who are going to have to either interface during the implementation or have also perhaps a competing offering. These are the people who you want to avoid showing up After you've submitted a proposal, you want to avoid having it get turned down because there were people in the mix that you didn't know about and you didn't have a chance to get to and to help them reach the decision that your offering was the best thing for the company. The second point I'll make about shortening sales cycles is I always have the original discussions, the initial conversations by phone, partly because they can be arranged more quickly in someone's calendar than an in-person meeting. But you may also be in a situation where you have a local office or a regional operating group, but the head office is somewhere else. By using the phone and other virtual means of outreach, you can more quickly move through a number of these discovery type conversations in the early days, finding out where those influencers might be and what their perspectives are around whatever you're offering. A third way is to understand that the role is not to argue for your value proposition, but to facilitate those discussions among all those stakeholders. Of course, it lengthens the process if you assume that you move from one person to another in a sequential way. If you can do it simultaneously, you're not only gathering the sort of view of the world, which is going to be different in different areas, and therefore understanding it that your role as a facilitator of a movement towards consensus internally, you can do that simultaneously. You're gathering business intelligence and you are hopefully influencing the conversations internally towards an agreement about the value of the business problem that you're addressing. So you're ultimately getting to a situation where you don't have access either through networks or other sorts of means to reach these senior people, and therefore you're faced with making the cold call. Well, I never make cold calls because there are great ways to warm them up, and here's what I do. I first of all reach out to the assistant, and in large corporations they will have an executive assistant. In smaller businesses it could be another family member or an administrator, somebody who has a couple of different functions. But the approach to the assistant is the same. I say something like, Jean, I'd like to arrange a few minutes on the phone with Mr. Smith. We haven't spoken before, and I'm happy to send along a bit of an outline of the work that we do in whatever your area is, if you help me with your email address. So we send that email to the executive assistant with an attached document, which I call a briefing document, and we'll get to what it includes and what its purpose is in a minute. But this approach makes sure that the executive will open your briefing document. And of course, it's not going to happen immediately. So I follow up once a week and I restate the same. I leave it, if it's a voicemail, I leave it exactly the same. Jean, I'd like to arrange a few minutes on the phone with Mr. Smith. I have sent along a briefing document on the work that we do in X, Y, and Z. If you're looking for that, the email address is, and there you have the second time that this will get into the executive's assistant's inbox, and it will get forwarded to that executive. Now, there are in 7 out of 10 times where you reach out to an individual using this approach, my experience shows that you will, in 7 out of those 10 attempts, you will get a referral. It'll be forwarded either for review, or it will be up to, of course, the person that it's sent to by that executive to decide whether or not they see that the issue you are raising is relevant. This is very good news because what you've just done is you now have insight into where those influencers lie, who they may be. Surprisingly, if they're not in the same line of business, or they don't seem to have a title that looks like they're going to be the person writing the check, it is great business intelligence because you know that this executive would be turning to these people. And I call that beyond the org chart influence. In other words, these are individuals who are tangential perhaps, but would be impacted by the decision to implement your solutions. So you now have access to people who you didn't know were going to be involved before. And it is not necessarily, can you assume that you're going to get a meeting with them, because they're going through the same evaluation process as the executive who sent it to them would be. Remember, this is a consensus-based world now. And it is not that the senior exec simply says, we're going to do this. The consultative approach around decisions has produced that 5.4 stakeholder world that CEB refers to. So a referral is business insight. It is not a brush off. And why is that so? Because when the material that you sent is forwarded, it pre-qualifies their view of the business challenge by the person who received it. Just a note, it could be that it's referred to a couple of different people. You know, it goes in a chain reaction from one person to another before you end up actually booking a meeting. And that is perfectly useful information. It is something you'll want to track, because you're now building an org chart, and or if it's a public company, you would not necessarily be able to have a source for who those other executives and other business units might be. But as you track where your information has been sent and who it's been sent to, and you track it hopefully in the CRM, so you can retrieve it and you can share it in terms of the business intelligence that you're gathering, you now know that there is some relevance. Because if there were no relevance of the business challenge that you're raising with your document and with your business offering, you would have simply gotten a no. So that's one piece of insight that is extremely useful. The second is that it does identify where the influencers are around the persons that you've targeted, and or it could indicate that an investigation of this business challenge is already underway, and those people being consulted have started either looking for resources or are encouraging discussions internally. They are probably going to turn out, when you meet with them, that they are the ones that can help you advance your case internally. And these are called mobilizers, by the way. We'll use that term a bit. The third point about a referral representing insight is that you have now been given permission to access those people who are indirectly influencing the decision. And they could be, as we mentioned before, user groups, they could be subject matter experts, they could be implementation support groups. If your program is implemented, those are the people who would have to be involved in the installation, but they are also part of the evaluation at this stage. The fourth insight is that when the executive forwards your information, sometimes those, if a discussion is underway, those are where the roadblocks have existed previously. In other words, there might be people inside who are already raising that business challenge as an important issue to address. They may have started down the track of trying to gain consensus, and it may have stopped there. So the executive may be forwarding your information because the executive sees the business challenge as important and knows that these are individuals who would be influential in getting that discussion reignited. And a fifth point is pointing towards methodology. There are ways of tracking where your document is forwarded and where when it gets opened. Things like bit.ly links, you can, or if you have a CRM, that will help you notice, even if you don't get a meeting with them, it will help. You'll start to see patterns of either functional groups or other sorts of influencers that you weren't necessarily aware of. So tracking your document movement inside of an organization can also yield insight. What are we putting in that briefing document that we send out in order to get a meeting? We reframe our value proposition from a features and benefits to a shared value proposition. And we'll look at an example, a business case that was in the color printing field, where it was Xerox moving into the education field. They went out with traditional sales material, features and benefits arguments. You know, a color printer is faster. We have longer life cartridges than anyone in the marketplace. Here's a return on investment calculator. They sounded like their competitors, and this was a higher priced, a premium product, and it wasn't necessarily seen as a huge benefit, so they were losing out to their competitors based just on price. As the people on the front line came back to head office and shared the reasons that they weren't getting the deals, what came to light is that there were influencers, not necessarily purchasers, but there were influencers in a general way, either board members or administration groups or even parents. And although they weren't talking about buying printers, what they were all talking about in terms of where their concerns were lying, where their principal preoccupations were focused, was related to school rankings. So Xerox was challenged with restating their benefits. And after they did this, they went back out to the market with an argument that went like this. Color images lead to higher student engagement, to better performance and retention, therefore to higher grade point average performances in schools, and therefore higher school rankings. So this is an example of how you move from a features and benefits argument, in other words, a product or performance-based value proposition, to a value proposition that is, think about it as a Venn diagram. This is the shared point inside that value of if it's constructed as a Venn diagram, that everyone in and around, not directly related to the purchase itself, but where the preoccupations of the organization are focused at kind of a higher order of need, if you will. And the shared value helps guide the conversations and the focus throughout the entire sales process. Firstly, because the briefing document that is sent with the invitation to arrange a meeting, it serves as a discussion agenda. So when everybody in the organization that you are entering, that you are targeting as a potential customer, receives exactly the same message about where the business challenge that your product or service is targeting, that therefore will allow you to control during that discussion, control the focus of where the discussion will be, because it will guide towards that higher value or shared value that you may at the beginning have to guess about. You may have been able to deduce it from some of the public record documents like shareholder presentation materials, for instance. You may have to guess at the beginning, but as you start moving through a number of these conversations with different areas of the business, you will start to get from them what their view of the world is in terms of what their priority for a business challenge is. And the third benefit of using the same document that is not describing your product, what you do or how you do it, is that you will not be put in a position of becoming a talking brochure during a meeting. What you're doing during these meetings is you are not asking them to decide whether or not your offering is relevant or even whether it's what they want or need, but you are there to gather business intelligence. And you do this by using high gain and opinion-based questions. And what you're listening for is who are those internal people, the corporate executive board and the challenger customer calls them mobilizers. In other words, they are committed to the business, addressing the business challenge that you're raising, and they are willing to advance your case with their colleagues internally. And it also, when you use these types of questions during a meeting, it will help you identify where the other stakeholders are and what their view of the business challenge might be. So some of the questions that I've used, for instance, would be to open the meeting. When you read our materials, that's the briefing document that you sent in advance. When you read our materials, what caught your attention? This is an opinion-based question. It's not, you don't know exactly what is going to come back to you, but what you're listening for is that business intelligence, the opinion-based view of whether or not this is a business challenge that they are willing to take on. Because remember, status quo, in other words, the steady as you go conditions right now is our biggest competition as salespeople. It is not whether or not they need it or want it. It is that change is the biggest stopper to a purchasing decision that involves a lot of renovation of their business processes. Another question that can have a high yield might be, what would you like to take away from our conversation today, perhaps related to projects you're working on? And this is a way of asking them to flesh out for you other things that they may be doing that aren't showing up in perhaps their title or their role, their official role inside the organization. And it's, again, an opinion-based question that's going to allow you to listen for where the focus is, both as the individual and the role that they have in investigating this business challenge that you're targeting. Another question that can yield some very interesting information: which other groups or departments would be impacted by our solution? And that is going to flesh out where some of the other either roadblocks or champions might lie. And another question around what might the reaction of other stakeholders, and you name the groups that you might have met with or that you're also hearing would be impacted. That is about how they're going to feel. It's a subjective response that you're listening for, and it will give you insight as to the kinds of issues that you're going to address moving forward. So here are a couple of examples of those briefing presentations. Two of them, Speech Science and Next Stage, are what I've built for a couple of client assignments. And HubSpot, which is a very well-known social media monitoring platform, it's an example of how one positions oneself on a higher plane, or a view of the business challenge that goes across an organization. So HubSpot faced the challenge of being perceived by marketing as not taking into account some of the other data that they wanted to capture. And in the case of the sales part of the groups that they were trying to win as new clients, the sales group said more or less, we've got CRM, how come we need you as well? So those are, you can look at them, the links are embedded, and you can start to see examples of how you move from a features and benefits argument to a business challenge and a shared stakeholder view of that business challenge, which can come to light in the form of objections, or it can come to light in terms of the the opinion type questions that you're using. And you're free to be in touch with me. I'm more than happy to talk through. It's not an easy process to move from the features and benefits, particularly if you are the inventor, uh, to what the customer view would be. But it is a very important part of winning consensus and therefore a purchasing decision. All the best.